Do we have a culture of tall poppy syndrome? Are we reluctant to acknowledge our business heroes and our innovators, and why do you think that is?
If we as an organisation laid off 200 people tomorrow, it would be on the front page of every newspaper. We're currently 150 people behind our hiring plans for the year, which was to hire 250 people, yet there is not a single journalist who would be interested in an organisation trying to hire a couple of hundred people. As a nation, if we could overcome that, it will be a competitive differentiator for us. And I think part of that is us celebrating success, not because there's a hero and a champion who becomes the tall poppy because that entrepreneur did this, but because as an ecosystem, we actually created employment and we created skills and we created wealth, and that is quite real and quite tangible. And again, it's not a sexy story, or we haven't found a way yet to make it. But I do think it's a very important thing for us to be celebrating.
The number one gap of Australia compared to other leaders actually in this diagnostic was leadership commitment and the willingness, essentially translating that into to drive and lean in and drive change. So the sense of how we unleash our tall poppy or to whatever extent our self-confidence as a leadership group to push that forward.
In our early days, we did have people being like, look at these kids saying they're going to send stuff to space. The essence of, I think, what this gathering is all about is, and this panel even is actually allowing for people to be successful and recognizing that.
I completely agree about not trying to emulate other countries. I think we have to solve an Australian problem or a problem that at least solves the ecosystem around Australia. So whether it's the Pacific area, etc., whether it's in agriculture or whatever, I'm not sure, but it needs to be an Australian problem that we solve, and we need to celebrate it in an Australian way.
And in my own personal experience, I've been the beneficiary of a lot of really great programs that have allowed us to be successful. And the essence of today is to celebrate that. It's allowed us to be a tall poppy. We've been in every major newspaper around Australia and even some internationally. We've been allowed to be tall poppies. I'm not afraid to say it, so that might have helped. But I think from our perspective now is we're doing a great job. Like, we're obviously not finished at being at growing this culture in Australia, but I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. And you've got success stories for that change and shift in culture, which is us. Just to show for it. Like, all the hard work that has been put in for the last 10 years and lobbying and running these events, I think has been worth it. And us at starting now are definitely seeing the outcomes of that.
It's a very interesting question about the tall poppy issue, and having worked in a bunch of cultures in my current life and then back in the Clinton days, I think it's critical to start with the question of what is the root cause under the tall poppy question. So in other words, there might be two big barriers that keep us worried about being the tall poppy. The first is the idea of being cut off, that once we elevate our image or a brand or a visible project and initiative, that someone else might undermine it, criticize it, might pull funding from it, might steal it.
I also think it's quite dangerous times for us there, because I think as it starts to lift its profile, that concept of actually pushing back harder and cutting the poppies earlier is a risk for us. But overall, I think that is starting to change.
But then the other side of the poppy problem, and all of that is essential, but the other side of the poppy problem is that we don't actually elevate. So the poppy never gets big enough to be seen. And I think what I heard in Larry's talk and what I've heard from Paul is that there's a sense that potentially in Australia, culturally, there may be a worry about promotion or self-aggrandizement. I mean, certainly the US of A is the champion of much of that. But we have to remember that unless people, this is something I learned from President Clinton, unless people know what's happening, you'll never actually move the dial. And one of the things I always remember about Bill Clinton is working with him, you would meet with him for maybe 5 minutes, and that's all he needed to understand very sophisticated problems. And then he would immediately say, well, how soon can I hold a press conference about it? And a lot of people criticized him for that. You know, oh, Bill's always tooting his own. But one of the things he said to me once, I'll never forget. He said, "It doesn't. Remember, it never matters what we're saying, Gene. It matters what the public is hearing."
The one thing that I think in this conversation that we need to be thoughtful of is not how do we become American, but how do we appreciate entrepreneurialism in an authentically Australian way.